Hello and welcome to another bikepacking Q&A video. A question I get asked nearly all the time is how do I fuel my bikepacking trips? I go bikepacking all over the world, usually by myself, so it's very important for me to get my fueling right. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you can fuel your bikepacking adventures. The first method is what I like to call the CCC Method. It stands for cafe and credit card. If you take your credit card with you with a bit of planning, you can pretty much do this anywhere in the world. As long as you know where you can stock up on food, stop off at cafes to get the food and drink that you need, you're good to go. What are the benefits of this method? Well, number one, it's very simple. Once you've planned where you're going to eat and stock up on food, it is super simple. Secondly, it requires virtually no carrying of stuff. You only eat when you stop off at places. You can stock up on snacks and things like that, but once they've run out, you just buy some more. You don't have to carry days and days worth of food on end. It's also a really good way of trying the local cuisine. If you're going to another country, for example, it's a really good way of trying the local food. While I'm on the local cuisine, if you're doing this method, it also means that for most meals, you're going to be having proper home-cooked healthy, potentially, meals, which is something you don't necessarily get if you're just buying convenience food. So what are the drawbacks of this method? There's a few, and the most obvious one probably is that it gets very expensive. If you're eating at cafes and restaurants for nearly every meal and buying snacks and drinks in between, the cost really does start to add up. Secondly, it does require planning, as I've said. If you're going somewhere very remote, it may be really challenging for you to just take a credit card with you and stop off at restaurants because there may not be any available. And thirdly, it is a massive use of time. It's not a waste of time, but if you are planning on doing long distances and you're having to stop and then go into a restaurant and then order your food, wait for your bill, etc., it does add up time-wise. So if you're wanting to cover large distances, this is probably not something you can rely on for every meal. The next method is one I like to call the Spaceman Method, where you take everything flat packed and dehydrated. This is a really good way of carrying all of your own food over long distances if you need to, and it's also very calorie dense. I used to use things like pot noodles, which I've mentioned before. I'm trying to move away from. They're not very good and they're especially not healthy at all. They are really convenient. You can buy them at pretty much any shop and they're very cheap. You can stick them in your bikepacking bag and then all you need is a little cooking stove like this, and that'll boil up some water, rehydrate them, and you're good to go. I am moving away from those, like I said, onto something a bit like this. This is a fire pot food pouch, and this is basically home cooked food that's been dehydrated. There's no rubbish in this whatsoever. And again, all I need to take is this little stove, boil some water, stick it in the pouch, and I'm good to go. I've got a healthy meal that packs down pretty flat and is very high in calories. I really like this method because with a bit of preparation, you can get everything you need before you go or pick up some last minute things when you arrive at your destination. It all fits down in my bikepacking bags and I know roughly how many calories I've got, what sort of macros and nutrition I've got in there as well, and for how many days, which allows me to be a little bit more flexible with my plans. If I want to stop off at a cafe as well to get something extra, I can, but I know that if I can't find anything, I've got everything I need for a number of days. That leads me nicely onto the benefits of this strategy in that if you're prepared, you don't need to rely on other factors like cafes and restaurants and supermarkets being open. You can be pretty much self-sufficient, which is brilliant. You also only need a very minimal amount of cooking equipment, although you do still need some cooking equipment, which can be quite heavy, but that little stove that I just mentioned is absolutely ideal for boiling water for cups of tea, coffee, or dehydrated food. So what are the drawbacks of this method? There's a few. The first one is if you're not prepared and you're not buying in bulk, it can get very expensive. One of these sachets can cost you about £7 or £8 if you buy them individually, which is bordering on cafe and restaurant money for a meal. Another drawback of having mostly dehydrated food, especially the snacks, I'm not really talking about the meals here, is that they are naturally very dry. They're dehydrated. So you do need to take on board a lot of liquid if you're consuming lots of dried foods. It's also quite easy to go down the unhealthy route with this. You can just go for convenience food, flat packed flapjacks and biscuits and cakes, which is something I am guilty of doing. And as a result, you tend to find you're just eating mostly rubbish throughout the day because it's lightweight and convenient. So with a bit of planning, a little bit of money spent as well, you can have a very healthy, sustainable, long distance bikepacking food setup. And the final method is the one I call the cookout. And this is where you literally take, as it sounds, everything you need to cook your own healthy meals from scratch. There's a lot more than you think that you need to take with you. So obviously you're going to need your pots, pans, gas, stove, cooking utensils, ingredients, bowls, plates, and something to wash and dry up with as well. So there's quite a lot of stuff involved. I know a lot of people like to do this just to go out for an overnighter and cook a meal from scratch out in the wilderness. And this is something that I've done in the past. I know my dad really likes doing it, and he often takes some ingredients to do a bit of cooking when we go bikepacking, but it's not for everyone. So what are the main benefits of doing this? Obviously it's the healthiest option. You're in 100% control of what you're making. So if you take all the raw ingredients and cook it from scratch, it's undoubtedly going to be better than a processed meal that you picked up from a service station. It's also very rewarding. It's a very nice thing to do if you're interested in this sort of thing, to go out and cook a lovely meal from scratch and enjoy it on a cold evening while you're in your tent or under a tarp if it's raining. That can be a really nice thing to do. So what are the drawbacks? I mentioned before you're going to need a lot of stuff. It's also very heavy and inherently quite bulky. So if you're doing long distance touring, carrying all of that cooking equipment can soon start to get very tiring. So the bottom line with this one, I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you really like cooking or you're going as a big group on a bikepacking trip. It's a lot easier when there's multiple people to carry the stuff, and a lot more cost effective if you're feeding lots of people than if it's just one person cooking a whole meal from scratch. So it's a really enjoyable thing to do, but I probably wouldn't recommend it for most people. As is often the way with this sort of thing, the best method for you depends pretty much entirely on your goals and what you're wanting to get out of your bikepacking trip. Personally, I like a mixture of the first method and the second one. I like to carry a lot of my own dehydrated food. I like to keep it simple with just one small stove. That's enough to do my cups of tea and most of my food, which I really like. But equally, I have nothing against stopping off at cafes and restaurants if I want to get some additional food or try some local cuisine. Very rarely do I go out and take a full cooking setup, but I do like to do it now and again. The only problem for me is it's just too heavy and too cumbersome, especially with all this filming equipment that I take on my bikepacking adventures. But I'm curious to know what you do. Please leave a comment in this video explaining what you do to fuel on your rides, and we can all learn from each other. Thank you very much for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next video.